As we sing the song before the lesson, if you would like, you may stand, and it's also a time for the children to go to children's church, ages kindergarten through, or through 3 through kindergarten. Some glad morning when this life is over.
Frank mentioned in his prayer that, of course, this is the day that we begin to make preparation for our Vacation Bible School that will begin tonight at 6 o'clock and will carry through Wednesday night. And there are announcements that Jeff will mention at the conclusion of our service where we need your help, as in right after the amen, if you can hang around for a little bit and help with the transformation that will take place. They're going to transform some things throughout the course of our building to be utilized through Wednesday night. So it's an exciting time. It's a reminder that the summer is quickly passing by. I was looking at the calendar a while ago, and it won't be too long. We'll be making preparation for Family Day, which is always an exciting time. It's the last Saturday in September. And you don't want to think about that because of all the things you've got going on, everything that's going to take place between now and then before you know it, you'll be putting up your Christmas tree. So just get ready because summer continues to fly by. And last weekend, of course, with 4th of July weekend, a lot of activities, a lot of things going on, and a lot of reaction to that particular part of our series on marriage. Marriage as God intended, and we are bringing that series to a conclusion this morning. And if you have your Bibles, be opening to the book of Ecclesiastes. And that's not one that we normally turn to, so I'm going to keep talking to give you time to look in the table of contents, maybe to find the page number, to find yourselves in the book of Ecclesiastes. You know, throughout this series on marriage, we've talked about statistics and we've talked about data. And all of that data and a lot of that statistical information, of course, is across the board. And it takes in all demographics and all backgrounds that factor into the family dynamic that we see in our culture today. And what I want to do this morning is basically talk specifically about marriage within the context of the church family. You know, all of us love romantic stories, and you'll notice the title of our concluding lesson this morning is ending happily ever after. And regardless of familiarity or not, we all have an understanding of how good stories turn out. I know our kids grew up watching the animated version of the Disney animated version of Cinderella. Last year, they came out with another version. There's a remake. It's not animated, but it incorporates a lot of the technology. And initially, I felt like I had gotten kind of strong-armed into going, but we went, and I thought, well, it can't be. Why would you go to another? It turns out the same. But thankfully, it was a good experience. I enjoyed the technology and some of the changes, but basically the story is the same. Regardless of what version of Cinderella you grew up with, it's the same. Cinderella is a beautiful, sweet, hardworking peasant girl, and the prince that she meets is handsome, and he's rich, but he's also sensitive, right? And they meet at this fancy ball, and the sparks fly, and then all of a sudden she vanishes, leaving a glass slipper behind. And then after a desperate search, he finds Cinderella. He puts the slipper on her foot, and then they get married, right? And of course, and you can say it with me, the final line of every classic Disney movie is what? They all lived happily ever after. Well, and we know as we leave the theater that that's good and that's nice, but it's also fairy tale. And deep down in our hearts, we hope and pray that that's the way it's going to turn out in our lives, right? I mean, you do want that. But you know what I'm really waiting on? I'm waiting on the sequel. And in fact, I have in my mind how Cinderella Part 2 would look like. And I say this at the risk of incurring criticism, but just kind of roll with me here for a moment. And in the sequel, you can imagine the footage would be shot about 6 months after the movie concludes. And the sequel would begin with when Cinderella gets up in the morning and she discovers that the toothpaste cap is missing. And the prince's dirty clothes are all over the floor. The toilet seat has been left up. And she says, "What was I thinking when I married this goofball? And when I got married, I was so happy about not having to pick up after my stepsisters. And sure enough, now I have to do it for this slob that I married." And come to think of it, we haven't been to a ball in 6 months. So, she storms into the bedroom and she says, "Why ain't you picking up after yourself?" And then he's thinking, what have I done? And her lack of education and her unsophisticated hayseed grammar really grates against me and my upper crust elitist family. And look at her, she's a mess. She sleeps in a flannel robe and she has the etiquette of Roseanne Barr. See, it would be a great sequel. And I'm waiting for that one. Now that one I'll see. I'll go see that one, but that's not going to happen. And really, it's probably a good thing, because the question is it possible to live happily ever after? And I don't know about you, but when you look at the advertisements and you look at a lot of the information that's out there about marriage, all the couples are young, and that's okay. But when we really begin to talk about the success of marriage, what we're really wanting to recognize, of course, is the longevity of marriage. And so when we look around this gathering this morning, and I can look and you can go back in your directory and we can look at examples of people who've been married 35, 40, 45, 50, 60 years. In fact, if you were to put all that together just within the context of our congregation here, what would you say? 1,500, maybe 2,000 years of marital experience? And that carries with it an unbelievable, I think, motivation for younger couples, and that is to look at these older couples that have been together 50 plus years and ask yourselves, how do you do that? And what I want you to do this morning is to listen to a passage, because it might help us understand why some marriages last and some fade away, why some stay and while others leave. I'm going to begin at verse 9 of Ecclesiastes chapter 4. It's a very familiar passage. In fact, I've heard it read at weddings, and for good reason. Verse 9 says, "Two are better than one, because they have a good return for their work. If one falls down, his friend can help him up, but pity the man who falls and has no one to help him up." Also, if two lie down together, they will keep warm, but how will one keep warm alone? Though one may be overpowered, two can defend themselves. A cord of 3 strands is not quickly broken. And it's that last phrase, a cord of 3 strands is not quickly broken. And while this passage is not a direct reference to marriage, I think you see the analogy. And I think it's that third strand, the strand that would represent God, that needs to be the center of your relationship. So, how can you have a marriage that perseveres and lasts and becomes a happily ever after marriage? Well, whether you're single or whether you're married, I want to give you a recipe. And this is kind of a concluding. I'm just kind of wrapping up this entire series. And so some of what in fact, most of what we're saying may seem rather anticlimactic, if you will, but it is a summation of the entire series. The first ingredient that I want you to see is a God-honoring choice. A God-honoring choice. You know, in the early stages of a relationship, people often get blinded to a person's character because they're so infatuated. They're so caught up in the relationship, and then they get married, and they can't figure out why they're having all these problems. And I think it's kind of like construction. You buy a house, or maybe you build a house, and then maybe 6 months to a year into living in that, you start noticing cracks in the sheetrock, and you begin to notice some problems, and then you call the builder back, if he'll come, or you'll get somebody out there and they say, well, the problem's not with the wall, problem's with the foundation. And it goes back to something that we began this series with, and that is this a solid foundation on which to build a relationship? That's the question. And would you make a better friend of the person than the spouse of this person? Because sometimes the two don't overlap. For instance, a wife says, I don't understand why he's never home. He's always out drinking with his buddies. Well, where did you guys meet? Well, we met at a bar in the middle of a chugging contest. Or a husband says, I think my wife is seeing someone else. Well, how did the two of you get together? Well, we started dating while she was in the middle of a very rocky and unhappy marriage. So obviously those are bad reasons to get married. But why do we marry? Solomon says here in Ecclesiastes, sometimes it's practical. You know, you can help one another out. Solomon says you get a better return on your work. You have someone to be with. There's a level of companionship, and there are all kinds of different things that go through our minds that seem practical. Some people marry because of that oneness and that companionship. In fact, it was God himself that said, remember back in the first part of this series in Genesis chapter 2 in verse 18, that the Lord God said, it is not good for the man to be alone. I will make a helper suitable for him. Paul says in 1 Corinthians 7 that sometimes people need to marry due to a lack of self-control. Paul says if you cannot wait physically, go ahead and marry. Verses 8 and 9 says to go ahead and marry, not to the unmarried and the widows, I say. It's good for them to stay unmarried, but if they cannot control themselves, they should marry. Why? Because he says it's better to marry than to burn with passion. Now, those are good reasons, but the best reason is that you feel that the Lord has led you to that person and that your life and your ability to minister to other people is enhanced because of that relationship. But you better count the cost. You better count the cost of repeating the words that you did at your wedding, for better or for worse, for richer or for poorer, in sickness and in health, till death do us part. So that's the first ingredient, a God-honoring choice. The second ingredient, and that is a lifelong covenant. And I think the word covenant is crucial to this ingredient. And because we can talk about marriage as a contractual agreement, and it is. It's a contract between two people. It's a contract with the state. You have a license, and you have legal issues that go into obviously the making of that contract, and even the breaking of that contract requires legal involvement. And so we understand the contractual aspect. I had much rather talk about the covenant aspect of marriage. Because throughout both sections of Scripture, when we read the concept of a covenant is always involves sacrifice. And any covenant, especially the covenant of marriage, is going to require the sacrifice of both parties. How do we determine character and priorities so that we can see if we can really have a lifelong covenant with this person? And I apologize for not putting these questions on the PowerPoint this morning. But if you can't write these down quickly enough and you'd like a list of them, I'll be more than happy to provide these for you. But it was an article written by a fellow, and the name of the article was "What Lies Beneath." And he said this is a series of questions that you need to ask yourself about the other person. What does this person talk about, and how often do they speak? And that's an important question, meaning what? Do they ever shut up? No. What are they usually talking about? Number two, does this person always tell the truth, or do they stretch the truth for personal gain? Number three, would I enjoy spending time with this person if we had no physical contact? In other words, if this person were not a potential family member, would I even be around them? Number four, do they serve others in any way? Number five, how do they treat their parents? Number six, are they nice only to those who are popular and who can benefit them? And finally, do I feel encouraged and affirmed and challenged by this person? Now, let me make it clear. This is the starting point. The best way to start your selection process, and I say start the selection process, is based on 2 Corinthians chapter 6 and verse 14, where Paul says, don't become partners with those who reject God. And I've looked at a cross-section of translations, and I have to say, I think the message really captures the heart of that. Your translation may say, as mine does, do not be unequally yoked. And that's good, but I think the message captures it. Don't become partners with those who reject God. It goes on to say that's not a partnership, that's war. And it carries with it the idea of even beyond marriage. That even if you're talking about not necessarily marriage, but if you're talking about friendship or a business partnership, someone that you're going to be attached to, then the same principle would apply. And it certainly makes sense in a marriage that if you choose someone to be your lifetime partner in marriage, you make certain that you're going in the same direction spiritually. And some say, well, wait a minute, now that's unfair. I mean, why would God do that? He's kind of narrowed the playing field, if you will, for me. He's really narrowed the number of choices of people that I can marry. Okay, but hear me out. Understand this. This guardrail, which I think this guardrail that God has placed, He's put it there because He wants us to be able to share the most important thing in our life with the most important person in our life. And I say this to those of you out there that are not married, you don't give up on this one. You don't let this particular standard slide. You make certain that you realize that this is non-negotiable. And that there are plenty of people here in this room who would tell you that the price is way too high. Now, that's not necessarily a given. You can marry a believer and still the situation unravel. But the point is, if God is the most important commitment in your life, and it's not the most important commitment in the life of the other person, one of two things is going to happen. One, you'll either miss a great deal of shared intimacy because of what you prize the most and what you pour your life into and resources isn't shared with the other person. Or secondly, that spouse will pull you away from God, and that's even worse. So one of two things will happen. Years ago, a woman wrote to Dear Abby, and she said, "Dear Abby, I'm 44 years old, and I'd like to meet a man my age with no bad habits." Dear Abby's response was, "So would I." You know, there's no perfect prize out there. And I we've got couples in here that have just gotten married, couples who are going to be marrying this summer, and I tell them all the time, you know, as unique and as special as your relationship is, you know, really, you're average. We're really all just pretty average. We think we're not. We want to think you're really pretty average. You'll be an average husband or an average wife, and to those of you who are expecting, you'll be an average mom and an average dad, and that's okay. Because there's no really perfect prize out there. Marriages that are built to last depend on the old-fashioned word commitment. And we started the series with that, and we're ending with it this morning. And we go back to the passage in Genesis 2 and verse 24. "For this reason, a man will leave his father and mother and be united to his wife, and they will become one flesh." They will be cemented together, the language carries with it. They'll be united. And not only is there this exclusiveness from other partners, there's also an exclusiveness from their parents as well. You leave your father and mother, you are united to your spouse. Now, leaving here doesn't simply mean geographically. It means that you become your own separate person with your own identity as a marriage and as a family. You build upon the way you were raised and the example your parents set. So, it's not only a God-honoring choice, it's not only a lifelong covenant. You know, I did a little checking yesterday, and back in the 90s, Stephen Curtis Chapman recorded a song entitled "I Will Be Here." Great song. It was the wedding song of the late 90s. I cannot remember how many weddings I was either attended or was a part of where this song was a part of. And I just did a little archive check yesterday, and all the videos of that song, as I said a while ago, are, you know, here's a couple, it's in the middle of their wedding, or they're on the beach, and they're all young people, and that's okay. But one of the high points of the song is, he says, "And when the mirror tells us we're older, I will hold you, I will watch you grow in beauty, I will tell you all the things you are to me, I will be here." And I thought, well, maybe when they get to that verse, they'll transition to an older couple. But no, they stay with the younger ones, and they're always attractive, and they're always young, but you know, that too is not reality. Because if there is, the third ingredient, by the way, is a Christ-centered commitment, then age is going to, progress. A God-honoring choice, a lifelong covenant, and a Christ-centered commitment. It takes work. It takes effort. And that doesn't happen by accident. Sometimes, in fact, even this morning, you may hear a message like this, and you're not in a good marriage. You hear me talk about till death do us part, and you're sitting here thinking in your mind, that's a tough pill to swallow, and it sounds like a tough pill. But let me tell you something. You listen to a couple who's been married for 50 years, and they will tell you it's not always easy. It hasn't always been, a wide, easy road. But God makes a way. Proverbs 11 and verse 3 There, the wise man says, the integrity of the upright guides them, but the unfaithful are destroyed by their duplicity. Last week, I preached on about our nation and the foundation that the family plays and how revival begins with each and every one of us. And there's some very, very direct and pragmatic things that we do individually by repenting and living lives that are examples of faith. And I think that's where marriage factors into this. There are so many marriages in this room right now where we look at examples. You are the examples of how it works. You have set the example of moral character and the way that looks in committed relationships. But to younger couples that are coming along, your path is going to be the same, but it's going to be a little more difficult, and I'll tell you why. Years ago, I read in a book about a couple of teenagers that decided to play a prank. And they broke into a department store, and they got in there after hours, and they got a hold of the old pricing guns. Remember, you click them, and then you could stick the price on. And they went through and throughout the store, and what they did was they changed the prices on everything. And the high-end items they sold for cheap, and the inexpensive items they marked up the prices sky high, which I thought was pretty funny. The owner of the store didn't think it was too funny. The customers really didn't see the humor in it, and of course, neither did the police. But it's a perfect picture of what's happening in our nation when it comes to the topic of marriage. A changing of the price tag has occurred. And what was timeless and priceless has now been discounted. And in time and in turn, we valued how a person looks on the outside more than we have on how they look on the inside. We have measured the success of that couple by the potential earning power that they have rather than the longevity and the quality of that relationship. And as I said last week, bailing out and moving on to the younger, more new, improved model has become the norm. Instead of finding fulfillment through faithfulness, that is now the exception. So as a society, we've given more attention, more applause, more ink to an athlete who beats his wife or some reality TV bimbo who doesn't have a clue as to what it's like to go through the valleys and to stick through the tough times of marriage. So young couples, that's what you're facing. The level, the price tags have changed. And what you have to keep in mind is what's really valued and what's really important. And my challenge to you this morning is a simple one, and that is to have Christ as the third strand in your relationship, to make God-honoring choices. And I'll confess this, as I have worked through these various points and various ingredients, and I could look through our audience and look through our congregation, and there's a couple that continues to come through my mind. And as you think, well, there's nothing more beautiful than to see a young couple standing here on these steps and exchange vows and confess the love that they have for each other, and they clasp hands, and they've got pure hearts and pure motives, and they just want to build a family that God would intend. And that's beautiful. But I'll give you one that's equally beautiful, and that's the sight of an old man and an old woman finishing their journey together. And David is here this morning, and I wouldn't call him out for anything. But David, I think about your grandparents. For several years, Brother and Sister Flowers worshiped with us, and they were into their early 90s and had a marriage that lasted 70-plus years. And in those waning years, even up until Sister Flowers' health would not allow, and I've told classes before, they would wake up and he would ask her, well, what do you want to do today? She said, well, why don't we go eat lunch in Gatlinburg? And they'd get in the car and leave Guntersville and drive to Gatlinburg. Spend all morning, get up there, eat lunch, walk around, and didn't have a cell phone then. Marge had no idea where they were. They'd get home the next day, 2 days later, what do you want to do? Well, let's go I need to go dress shopping. Where you want to go? Let's go to Chattanooga. And their relationship obviously was not based on geography because they went wherever they wanted to. And to me, they're an example of exactly what I'm talking about. And her passing obviously left a void, left an emptiness in his life, and he followed her soon after. And I look at that and I go, that's it. That's exactly what we want. We want lives that you get to the point that the two of you, really, you can't even imagine functioning without the other. But you could, and many of you have. But you just don't see it that way at that point. So ending happily ever after, well, it all depends on the ingredients. And when I look at couples like that, their hands are wrinkled and gnarled, but they're still clasped. Their faces are a little bit wrinkled, but they're radiant. Their hearts are tired, but they're still strong. And they've proved that marriage truly is a blessing from God. I want to close as our invitation by reading Paul's words from the 5th chapter of Ephesians. And you can read the admonition to wives and to husbands. But Paul's reasoning is so direct. He says, verse 29, "For no man ever hates his own body, but nourishes and cherishes it, and Christ does the church, because we were members of his body." Then he quotes the passage from Genesis 2. "For this reason a man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh." And it's as if Paul's original recipients are doing like we do, and we just kind of scratch their head and go, "What are you talking about?" And then he hits us in verse 32. The mystery is a profound one. And I'm saying that it refers to Christ and the church. And the relationship that we're to have as husbands and wives is a mirror of the relationship that Christ has with us. And it's a relationship that he offers to you if you're willing to accept it. But it's offered to you this morning if you'll come while together we stand and while we sing.